Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So today we are going to continue with our discussion on what is considered to be a very controversial sort of a doctrine or teaching of the rebirth. And in the last class, we have covered what Baba Saheb Ambedkar classified as a rebirth of what. And we have seen at length as to how Baba Saheb Ambedkar looked at rebirth of what. So I thought before we proceed further, we will recapitulate or just think more on the concept of rebirth of what. So according to the Buddha, or according to the theory which has been handed down to us of what constitute a human being. And we know that biologically we have a body and we have what is called the consciousness. And according to the Buddha, the body is not just one feature, but it's an assembly of several things. Like when we think about our human body, we have senses, we have skin, we have bones, we have flesh, we have internal organs like heart, brain, and liver, lungs, so on and so forth. So when we think about the body, we have to take this broader view of the body that there is, and we have to understand the body as it is. And we have seen as to how the body continuously produces the energy through the process of what is called the respiration, because respiration or breathing is so essential for the body to survive. Without breathing, we cannot survive. So we know that the breathing is a part of the body and it conditions the body. So looking at the body, we can see that it's very dynamic. And in traditional parlance, in the Buddhist terminology, the entire process of body is called rupa or kaya, or, if you want to use the word, which is not the exact word, but material, by which our body is constituted of. So that's the component of the body. And if we look at the mind, but the mind in the broader sense, which the Buddha has defined in terms of what is called nama. The meaning of the nama is something that bends towards. So namati is nama. So our mind always bent towards the objects of sight, sound, taste, touch, and all these 5 sensual objects. So our mind always tends towards that, namati. That's why it's called nama. And the nama has 4 components according to the Buddha. One of the components is Vedana, which means feeling and sensation. So whenever our senses encounter something, there is a sensation or a feeling, and it gives rise to what is called sadhya or perception. And then we have this mental activities, which is called the sankhara, and then we have a consciousness, which is called vijnana. So if you look at this 5 constituents that constitutes us, they are called skandha in traditional Pali terminology, or on Buddhist terminology, they are called skandha. So there are 5 skandhas. So let's recapitulate what are 5 skandhas: rupa, Vedana, Sadhya, Sankhara, Vijnana. In English, we can say form or body or corporeality or materiality. Then feeling, sensation, Vedana, perception, Sadhya. Then mental activities or mental processes called Sankhara. And then the consciousness itself, Vijnana. And they are all parts of the consciousness itself. This Vedana, Sadhya, Sankhara, Vijnana, they are part of the consciousness itself. So in the one of the greatest insight into the experience of mind and body that Buddha had beneath the Bodhi tree was to find that there is no eternal substance. There is no inherent reality there is. So what Buddha found in his experiences, and we all, the Buddha asked us to find in our own experiences anything that never changes, anything that is always permanent, anything that never undergoes any change. And when we reflect upon, or when we are aware of a body and mind, we find, that's a challenge to us to discover something within our experiences which is permanent. And the Buddha said that you cannot find anything permanent. So he inquired into Rupa, and he found that the Rupa is anicca. So then he inquired into Vedana, the sensation and feelings, and the Buddha found that the Vedana are also impermanent, anicca. And the Buddha inquired into the Sadhya or perception, and he found that the Sadhya are also impermanent. And with the Buddha inquired into Sankhara, and he found that the Sankhara are also impermanent. And the Buddha inquired into what is called the Vijnan, and the Buddha found that, it's also impermanent. And then Buddha asked, what is impermanent? Can it belongs to us? The answer is no. What changes cannot be purchased by anybody. So whatever changes is anatta. So Buddha found that the Rupa is anatta, means lacking any substantial reality to Rupa, any substantial reality to Vedana, any substantial reality or fixedness to Sadhya or Sankhara and Vijnan. And the Buddha said that, the characteristics of everything in the world is anatta. And then when we look at the world around, we see that there are different patterns which are coming into existence. Like there is a pattern of seasons, there is a pattern of how the earth rotates around the sun, and likewise the sun rotates, in the galaxy, and the galaxy itself, they rotate. So there are certain patterns in the world. At micro levels there are certain patterns, and at macro levels there are certain patterns. And these patterns can be explained by what the Buddha described as the truth of paticca samutpad, conditioned existence. So with this, that arises, with the cessation of these, that ceases. If this doesn't arise, that won't arise. And if this is, that is. So it's in a way we can see that everything in the world is conditioned, subjected to the condition. And if the conditions are present, those phenomena will occur. And if those conditions go away, the phenomena will just disappear. So what the Buddha taught and what the Buddha found is that there is nothing permanent in the world. There is nothing permanent in the world. That is what the Buddha discovered. Therefore, Buddha was not for what is called the eternalism, something that exists forever. And there is that everything is destroyed. That's another end, means complete destruction, complete annihilation. And the Buddha discovered that what happens is a process of transformation, things coming into existence and disappearing. And Buddha described this in a very beautiful sort of a way. Yam kinchi samudaya dhammam sabbam tangvaya dhammam. Whatever has the principle of arising has the inbuilt principle of passing away. Samudaya and vaya, means udaya and vaya are the part of the same story. Something cannot arise without having the principle of its falling apart. So whatever is conditioned is going to disappear when the conditions disappear. So this is a very important formulation of Buddha Dhamma, where the Buddha discovered that nothing arises without having the principle of passing away. So arising and passing away are as if the two sides of the same coin. We exist because we are subjected to change. So anything which never change can never arise. It's not possible for anything to arise if it is not going to change, if it is not going to transform. So what we can say that the Buddha's teaching is about, transformation, regeneration, recycling, And we can see that in our own minds, we can see the same habit patterns arising again and again because of the sankhara, because of the same processes that we are feeding to ourselves. And we respond that way all the time. And that is what we can say in a nutshell, that is what we can say the principle of regeneration, principle of recycling. So when I began this class today with a discussion on what is called the five skanda, this five sort of part of dimension of a being, which is Rupa, Vedana, Sadhya, Sankhara, and Vijnana. And Buddha when inquired into this constituents of what we are, he discovered that we are there is nothing substantial, there is no atta, there is no permanent self, there is no permanent reality, there is no permanent substance. Everything is a process, everything is happening due to several factors. Everything is happening because of condition, and the Buddha described it as the conditioned coexistence. So you see, on one extreme end we have eternalism, and on another complete destruction or annihilation. So the Buddha discovered that there is nothing permanent in the world, and Buddha discovered that everything is constantly undergoing change, transformation, regeneration, recycling, which can be explained on the basis of the truth of paticca samutpad. And also same way Buddha has given the teaching of what is called the hetu pratyaya, but we are not going to go into that. Suffice here to say that upon inquiry, and the Buddha challenged all of us to inquire deeply into our own minds and body, and the Buddha found that there is nothing, no self. There is the idea of self is just a condition, just a conditioning. It's just a sankhara that if we explore deeply, we cannot find anything there. And that's what is beautifully explained in the questions of Milinder, where the Bhikshu Nagasen answers Milind about anatta, that only there is a name. And like he gives an example of a chariot. So where is the chariot? So if we want to disintegrate something and find out where is that, we cannot find. So it's a label, it's just a name, nama. And we have seen that nama means tending of the mind towards, namati means nama. So looking at rebirth from this perspective, we have to bear in mind that the Buddha discovered through his own experiences that everything is impermanent. The body is impermanent, the consciousness is impermanent. And but what has happened is, we human beings have a quest for certainty. We want something to be solid, something to be permanent, to hold upon, something which is static, something which never changes. And the Buddha used a very pertinent word, anicca, which doesn't also mean impermanence, but it also means not always so. Anicca. And if we study Indian language, nitya, anitya. Okay, so something which is occurring again and again and again and again, we see that some things are happening again and again and again and again, but they are not going to happen always. For example, if we look at what is called the sun arises the next day, we are sure, but there will be a day when the sun will never arise. There will be a complete destruction of the sun itself, and the moon itself, and the earth itself. So everything goes through transformation, and that's why the Buddha says yam kinchi samudaya dhammam sabbham tang vaya dhammam. And there is a very famous gatha in Buddhism, which was found everywhere written, e dhamma hetu pabbhava tesang hetu tathagato aho tesang cha nirodho evam vadi mahasamad. So the Buddha explained, whatever there are the causes of arising of something and the causes of disappearance of something. So you see that the Buddha has given the profound answer to a lot of questions. So that comes to that brings us to the nature of mind, and what happens to the mind after we die. So we have seen that what happens to mind after what happens to body when we die. And Buddha, and there is a very beautiful Pali text, Pali line, which says that kayasya bheda paranga marna. So, destruction of the body. There is the ultimate death. So the body and mind, as we have seen and as the Buddha taught, they are inseparable. They cannot exist without one another. And we cannot, say that, the mind can exist independently of the body, or the body can exist independently of mind. And that is what the Buddha has found, the interdependence of the so-called material and mind. So, a lot of people have tried to give the answer to the question of what happens to consciousness after death. And some people think that the consciousness, is also regenerated. And so whatever regenerates, it is basically not the self. So the self cannot be regenerated. The identities, if we have to use the word identity, how would the same identity come into being? How will the same name come into being? How will the same family come into being? So that's a very, the question which is very difficult to answer. And nobody can categorically say that that is how the process of rebirth takes place. And there are based on Abhidhammic studies, there are philosophers who talks about various levels of mind, and they talk about the mind at the level of a point from one body to another body, and that is called patisandhati chitta and punarbhav, and so many concepts are there. But I think we better not enter into that discussion, because we will find how that unfolds in the next chapter or next subsection that we are going to enter into. So the previous class or the previous subsection was about rebirth of what, and the rebirth of the four sort of material, so-called material constituents that we are made up of. They are regenerated, and that's a regeneration of matter. And regeneration of mind, of course, we have to think in terms of how the Vedanas are regenerated, how the Sadhya are regenerated, Sankhara regenerated, Vijnan are regenerated. Now let's briefly look at it from our own experiences. Like, we have grown from a child to the adults, and we are going to grow into the old person, and one day we are going to die. So continuously our rupa is changing, the Vedanas are changing all the time, the sadhya or perceptions are changing all the time. These sankhara are always changing. Today we are like this, tomorrow will be something else. And the mind is always changing. The mind can never be constant, because the characteristic of the mind is that mind has to hold on to some certain alamban, certain object. Without that holding on to object, the mind cannot come into being. So this is very beautifully explained by the Buddha himself. So when we study like this, when we meditate like this, with our own experiences, we discover that everything that we experience is impermanent, and whatever impermanent lacks the substantiality or the self or the atma, and everything in the world can be explained with what is called the theory of paticca samutpad. In the scientific parlance, it is called the cause and effect. Okay, and the scientists use this principle, use this theory all the time to discover something new in the world, to understand anything in the world. So we can apply the same principles here to understand our being. So let's look at what is happening in terms of rebirth of whom. And I think that's a question that Baba Ambedkar has raised in part 3. So part 2 was about rebirth of what, and today we are going to look at rebirth of whom. So the most difficult question is rebirth of whom. Does the same dead person take a new birth? You see, these questions are very important. And as a follower of the Buddha, we should be always raising questions. We should be raising many questions. So when we talk about the rebirth of whom, who is going to take rebirth? The second question that arises is, does the same dead person take a new birth? Am I going to take a new birth? And that's very important. Then the question arises, who am I? What am I? What is in me that is going to come again and again? Then when we talk about something which is never going to change, like the Vedic concept of Atma, that the body, changes the body, the soul changes the body, just like we change the clothing. But this is not the Buddhist doctrine, because Buddha founded everything in the world is impermanent. Everything in the world lacks substantiality. Everything in the world is in the continuous flux, momentariness. Every moment, everything is changing. So the question is, does the same dead person take a new birth? Did the Buddha believe in this thesis? Did the Buddha believe in this thesis? The answer is most improbable. So most improbable doesn't mean that it cannot happen. It might happen, but improbability, and we have to understand the concept of improbability, that something is improbable, means something is very less likely to happen. And it's a very scientific way of looking at the things. We cannot for sure say that, the rebirth is going to take place. It's most improbable. And how is that? The answer depends upon the elements of existence of the dead man meeting together and forming a new body. Then the possibility of the rebirth of the same sentient being is possible. If a new body is formed after a mixture or the different elements of the different men who are dead, then there is rebirth, but not rebirth of the same sentient being. This point has been well explained by Sister Khema to King Pasenadi. Now, see, when we talk about the same person coming into being, means the same body, the same mind coming into being again is most improbable, because the circumstances changes, the world changes, the conditions change all the time. So we cannot say that we cannot say about ourselves. And the Buddha has very beautifully explained. The child who we were and what we are today is not the same and not different. You see, I'm not different from when I was a child of 5, and I am not same as I was when I was a child of 5. And in Milinda Prashna, there is a beautiful phrase, nachaso nachapi anyo. Not the same, not the different. So there is a process. There is like this whole, it's like a river flowing. It's a flow, it's a flux. So we cannot say that the same pattern will recur. And when we look at the concept of recurring again and again in relationship with 4 noble truths, Buddha talks about the recurrence of, or regeneration of, or recycling of the tanna. Rag, Dvesh, and Moha, they continuously appear in cycles all the time. The Krishna is appearing all the time. When there is something enchanting, Nandi Raga Sahagata. If we see some object, enticing object, something pleasurable, our desire gets, awakened, and we go through the same pattern. And that is what Buddha says, that the punarbhav happens, and it's happening all the time. It's happening all the time, because some same things are repeating again and again. The tanna is coming into being, and then again it's like becoming thirsty, and then drinking water, and then after some time again becoming thirsty. So you see, these patterns get repeated again and again and again and again and again. But can we say that we as a sentient being are going to appear in the future the way we are right now? Will we have the same friends, the same being, same personality, same mind? No. So let's look at it very, very, very interestingly. This Sister Khema is a very amazing personality in the Buddhist history. She was a very brilliant sort of a Dhamma teacher, and she has realized the truth. And Buddha has praised her elsewhere also, that she had this very deep knowledge of Dhamma. And we have seen that in discussion in the previous section, we have seen Sariputta talking, and here Khema is talking. And this is a very profound paragraph, for profound sort of communication between Prasannajit and Khema. Let's look at it. I'm going to read it and I'm going to gloss over it. So this is how Baba Ambedkar has taken this in this section. This point has been well explained by Sister Khema to King Pasannajit. Okay. Once the exalted one was staying near Savatthi at Jeta Groha in another Pindika's Aram. Now on that occasion, the sister Khema, after going her rounds among the Kosalan, took up her quarters at Toranavattu between Shravasti and Saket. So between present-day Ayodhya and Shravasti, there was a city called Toranavattu. And there Sister Khema was living. The Raja Pasennaji, now the Raja Pasenadi of Kosala was journeying from Saket to Shravasti. So he was on way traveling from present-day Ayodhya to Shravasti. And midway between Saket and Shravasti, he put up for one night at Toranavattu. So he was also in Toranavattu with his retinue. So the Raja Pasennaji of Kosala called a certain man and said, "Come thou, good fellow, find out some recluse or Brahmin such that I can wait upon him today." Even so, your majesty, said that man in reply to Raja Pasenadi of Kosal, and after wandering through all Toranavattu, he saw not anyone, either recluse or Brahmin, on whom the Raja Pasenadi might wait. Then that man saw Sister Khema, who had come to reside at Toranavattu, and on seeing her, he went back to Raja Pasenadi of Kosala and said, "Your majesty, there is no recluse or Brahmin in Toranavattu such that your majesty can wait upon him. But your majesty, there is a sister named Khema, a woman disciple of that exalted one. Now of this lady, a lovely rumor has gone abroad that she is sage, accomplished, shrewd, widely learned, a brilliant talker, of goodly ready wit. Let your majesty wait upon her." You see that, the fame of the Bhikkhuni Khema was so widespread that she was known as, a sage, accomplished one, sharp-minded, widely learned, a brilliant talker, of goodly ready wit. What we understand from this passage, if we just digress a little bit, that at the time of the Buddha, there were a lot of these accomplished Buddhist women. There were a lot of Bhikkhunis who had understood, experienced the Dhamma very deeply. And that's what we understand from this passage, that how brilliant Sister Khema was. So the man who was told to find out somebody to discuss that night in the Toranvattu, when King Pasennaji was staying there, and accidentally or incidentally, Sister Khema was also staying there. So let's look at what happened there. So the Raja Pasennaji of Kosala went to visit Sister Khema, and on coming to her, saluted and sat down at one side. So seated, he said to her, "How say you, lady, does the Tathagata exist after death? What happens to Tathagata after his death? That also, Maharaja, is not revealed by the Exalted One." So the Buddha has not explained as to what happens to him after his death. And I think if we look at that, we can understand a lot of complexities, because this answer, what happens after that, what happens after death, they are not easy to answer. They are not the proper questions, we will say. Am I going to live after I die? So we have already assumed the existence of I. So this question is not proper. Am I going to live after I die? Because I have already assumed that I am there, I am living. But the Buddha says that I is just a conditioning. Okay, if we try to find within ourselves, we cannot find the self. And that is what the Buddha's discovery was. So these questions are wrong. What it's like, whether I will exist after I die. So, this I, this linguistic I that we have already assumed as the truth, that I am there. Isn't it? So the Buddha will say that this is just a linguistic ploy, the language, the labels, that I, me, names, and so on and so forth. So let's look at this. How then, lady, when asked, does the Tathagat exist after death, you reply, that is not revealed by the Exalted One. And when I ask the other question, you make the same reply. Pray, lady, what is the reason? What is the cause? Why this thing is not revealed by the Exalted One? Now pay attention to it very closely. Now in this matter, Maharaj, I will question you. Do you reply as you think fit? Now how say you, Maharaja? Have you some accountant, some ready reckoner or calculator able to count the sands in Ganges? Is there any account in the world, or ready reckoner in the world, or any calculator in the world who is able to calculate all the sands in the Ganges? there are so many 100 grains or so many 1,000 grains or so many hundreds of thousands of grains of sand? So the answer is, of course, no. Nobody can count the sands of the Ganges. Why? Because they are incalculable. Then have you some accountant, ready reckoner or calculator able to reckon the water in the mighty ocean? Thus, there are so many gallons of water, so many hundreds, so many thousands, so many hundreds of thousands gallons of water. No, indeed, lady. How is that? Mighty is ocean, lady, deep, boundless, unfathomless. Even so, Maharaja, if one should try to define the Tathagata, now listen carefully. This is very interesting. Even so, Maharaja, if one should try to define the Tathagata by his bodily form, means Rupa. We have seen these 5 skandhas: Rupa, Vedana, Sadhya, Sankhara, Vijnana. So if we try to define the Tathagata by his bodily form, that bodily form of Tathagata is abandoned, cut down at the root, and made like palm tree stump, made something that is not, made of a nature not to spring up again in future times, set free from reckoning as body. Maharaja is Tathagata. He is deep, boundless, unfathomable, just like the mighty ocean. To say that the Tathagata exists after death does not apply. To say Tathagata exists not after death does not apply. To say the Tathagata both exist and exist not, neither exist nor not exist after death, does not apply. Now we have seen these 4 Chatushtakoti called tetralemma: is not, both is and is not, neither is nor is not. We have seen that. And when we apply this question with this tetralemma to understand anything, we found that it leads to absurdity. And that's why Nagarjuna used it very beautifully to prove that everything is interdependent, everything is empty, shunyata. But here we have to understand that the Buddha cannot be known by his body. And more or less, this is true of all the rupas in the world. Like it is true of our rupa itself. Through our body, we cannot be known. And then Khema further explains, very beautifully she explains, if one should try to define the Tathagata by feeling, by Vedana, that feeling of Tathagata is abandoned, cut down at the root, ate free from reckoning, as feeling is the Tathagata. Maharaja, deep, boundless. Look at the words: deep, boundless, unfathomable, like the mighty ocean. To say the Tathagata exists after death, exists not after death, does not apply. And Venerable Khema goes into perception, sadhya. Then she goes into what is called the sankhara and consciousness. And she comes to, she replies that to say Tathagata exists after death, exists not after death, does not apply. So you see, when we are trying to understand our nature through body, through rupa, vedana, sadhya, sankhara, and vijnana, we cannot pinpoint. It's boundless. It's a mixture. It's a conditioning of so many things. Like even our own existence, for example, depends on so many things, known and unknown, that we cannot say that I am going to exist the next moment or next year, because our very existence depends on so many things. Like there are floods in the world, there are diseases in the world. We have just seen what has happened in terms of the coronavirus. There were conditions which were not in our hands, and we cannot say that everything is determined, that we are going to die at this particular time in this year. Nobody can say that. It's uncertain. It's completely uncertain. So what something which is deep, boundless, unfathomable, just like our own existence, same, isn't it? Only thing is that Tathagata is awakened to the nature of everything. We are not awakened to the nature of everything, but Tathagata is. Tathagata has directly experienced the way it is. So you see the verse number 27, then the Raja Pasenadi of Kosala was delighted with the words of Sister Khema and took pleasure therein, and he rose from his seat, saluted her by the right, and went away. Now on another occasion, the Raja went to visit the Exalted One, and on coming to him, saluted him and sat down at one side. So seated, he said to the Exalted One, "Pray, Lord, does the Tathagata exist after death?" "Not revealed by me, Maharaja." these are questions, these questions are called indeterminate. There are some questions which cannot be answered by the language. They are there. They cannot be answered by logic. We have to find a way to directly experience them. And the Buddha has given the way to directly experience our own natures. So, pray, Lord, does the Tathagata exist after death? Not revealed by me, Maharaja, is this matter. Then, Lord, the Tathagata does not exist after death. That also, Maharaja, is not revealed by me. He then asked the other questions and get the same reply. Now, how then, Lord, when I ask the question, does the Tathagata exist? Does he not exist after death? You reply, it is not revealed by me. Pray, Lord, what is the reason? What is the cause? Why these things is not revealed by the exalted one? Now, Maharaja, I will question you. Do you reply as you think fit? Now, what you say, how you some accountant, the rest is the same as before. So the Buddha exactly asked the way Khema Bhikshuni has asked to the Prasannajit. So the king is very much spellbound. He says, wonderful Lord, strange it is, Lord, how the explanation of both of master and disciple, both in spirit and in later, will agree, will harmonize, will not be inconsistent. That is, in any word about the highest. So he says that I also went to Khema Bhikshuni and asked her the same question, and she exactly answered the way you answered. She exactly said what you said. So you see, now these questions, there are some questions which are which distracts us, like the question related to birth and death, the question related with the origin of things, the question related to what is going to happen after we die. These questions are very flamboyant questions. They draw our emotions out. They draw our attention out. But what the Buddha said, that you try to cultivate the awareness of your mind and body, and we will realize by ourselves what it exactly is. What is the nature of the body? What is the nature of the mind? What is the nature of sankhara? What is the nature of feeling? And so on and so forth. And the Buddha has categorically said that there is nothing in the world. There is nothing in the world which is permanent. However hard we try to find something which never changes in our existence, we can never find. And the Buddha has asked us to do that. He has asked us to go and meditate, to be mindful of your body, to be mindful of our minds, to be mindful of our feelings, and to be mindful of the truth itself, the way it is. So you see, what I feel is that as an Ambedkarite or Buddhist, we should take exactly the same attitude that the King Prasannajit has taken in verse number 38. So what does, now Prasannajit is meeting the Buddha. They are together, and Prasannajit is asking him the questions. And the Buddha is answering the same way, the way Bhikshuni Khema has answered. And what the verse number 38 thinks, I think that is the end of the matter. It looks very simple, but I think when we talk about any questions that leads to speculation, that leads to a lot of conflicts, that leads to a lot of confusion, we have to take the same approach that King Prasannajit has taken in this verse number 38. Let me read it slowly so that we grasp the meaning of it. Well, Lord, now we must be going. We are busy folk. We have many things to do. You see, this is we have many things to do than getting into these speculative questions as to what happens after death to Tathagata, whether he exists or doesn't exist, or exist and not exist, both exist and does not exist, so and so forth. There are so many questions that are going on in the world that they draw our attention, and they are like the questions asked by Malukyaputra. They are questions asked by Pottapad. They are questions asked by Vachagotra. When we have seen that this question, whether the world is eternal or not, these questions are indeterminate. Some of the questions can be answered now, some of the questions can be answered in the future, because a lot of the questions which were not answered in the past. Now we are getting the answers to these questions. So what is implied in the verse number 38? I don't think it's an innocent verse number 38. It says, well, Lord, now we must be going. We are busy folk. We have many things to do. We all have many things to do, isn't it? And that's what the Buddha says. Do now what you think it is time for, Maharaja. So the end of the discussion is what? Do now what you think it is time for. We all have to do now, instead of getting locked, getting caught in the speculative net of questions. We have to do what we think it is time for. Thereupon, the Raja Pasenadi Kosala was delighted with the words of the Exalted One and welcomed him, and he rose from his seat, saluted the Exalted One by the right, and went away. Now, I think why these questions of rebirth and karma, which dominate almost all the Buddhist schools, and they find it very strange that the discussion here, because somehow all the Buddhist schools have tried to bring in the rebirth, and in the Kalama Sutta, the Buddha has taken this attitude that whether there is a rebirth or not, we don't have to bother about it. We do something which is beneficial to us and beneficial to others, and we are not bothered. And the same approach that the Buddha takes everywhere, like this question of a man slayed by an arrow on the square in the city, and everybody is speculating on the arrow, who has shot the arrow, all these forensic inquiries. But very few people are bothered about the pain that has been caused by when the arrow was shot. So instead of caring for that person, taking that arrow out and providing them healing and caring, we indulge into what is called the speculative questions. And the Buddha told in that very beautiful sutta that we should be worried about not the forensic inquiry, or not into what is called the metaphysical doctrine as to from where does the arrow come from, who shot the arrow, whether the shooter of the arrow was educated or uneducated, what was the tip of the arrow was made up of, what was the arrow made up of, metal or wood or something. These are all what is called the speculative question, metaphysical question that has nothing to do with the man who is suffering when the arrow is shot at. What we have to do is we have to carefully remove the arrow, we have to nurse, we have to care for the person who is suffering, isn't it? In other words, the Buddha's concern is about the dukkha that we all undergo all the time, and we do not know why we are suffering. So the Buddha asked us to inquire into the causes and the conditions of why do we suffer, why there is a dukkha, and what is the way out of the dukkha. Instead of speculating on many metaphysical theories, and it's a fascination of humanity to think about the origin of human beings, or what is going to happen after the death. The Buddha says that what is important to you right now is to really see, because there is enough of the dukkha arising all the time in the world, and there are causes and conditions by which the dukkha arises. And if we can work on the causes and conditions of the dukkha, we can remove the dukkha. We can have a more what we can say, a society which is not suffering, which is not in the conflict, which is not in that perpetual cycle of dukkha arising all the time. So I think that's why the discussion on the karma and rebirth, as a Buddhist, we have to think very carefully, and we have to take the same sort of stand that Baba Ambedkar has taken here, isn't it? There are a lot of people who talk about Baba Ambedkar putting in materialistic theory, but in Buddhism there is nothing like materialistic and spiritual. These are all just words, isn't it? We have to all the time go back to the Buddha's Dhamma, and its goal and the vision is to remove the suffering, is to understand the suffering and remove the suffering, instead of going into the realm that is speculative. And this verse number 38, I think, summarizes what there is. Well, Lord, now we must be going. We are busy folk. We have many things to do. So let's do many things for the betterment of the humanity. So I will stop here, and we will see if there are any comments or any questions or anything that anybody would like to share.
Beautiful explanation by you, Mr. Mangesh. I think it's sufficient to remove the doubts regarding rebirth. One thing I want to say that there is a similarity of the word rupa. This word is used for five khandas. That is Roop and Vedna, Sanyas, and Skarvidna. Then again, same word is used for these five senses, six senses, and its subjects like sight, sound, smell, etc. At time also, this word Roop is used. Roop, Vedna, Sanyas, and Skarvidna. There is a lot of confusion in.
No, we have to understand every word, as I told you, in the context of the paragraph.
Yeah.
So when we talk about the eyes experience rupa, means the rupa in that sense is a form, in form like and colors and the shapes, triangular, whatever. So we experience that through our eyes. It's called rupa.
Yes. Sound.
And sound, shabda, sadda. Okay, and nose, what is called the gandha.
Yes.
Okay, then by skin, photabba, sparsha.
Touch.
Okay, touch. But that touch has also a different meaning when it comes to in the Paticca Samuppada, when the word come has a different meaning.
Contact.
So it's a contact of the senses, but here it's a physical contact, photabbam. And then the object of the mind, which is called Dhamma. Okay, so all the objects of the minds are called Dhamma. And but the Dhamma, Buddha, when we talk about Buddha Dhamma, this Dhamma word has a different connotation.
Here it is thoughts, no?
Yeah,
mind and its thoughts.
Yeah, mind and its thought. But you see that we have to understand each word in its context, okay?
Yes.
So this rupa that is used here in terms of five skandhas is similar to the word we used in the context of the five senses, okay?
Yes. Thank you.
Mangesh bhai.
Okay, bhai.
Yeah, I have just one question arising in the mind.
Please.
We said the minds and its thoughts is what Dhamma is.
Yes.
So this great philosopher and intellect like Dr. Ambedkar, they thought something based on their five senses and of course the intellect, and then they put it for us. Okay, so it is a mean. The book is a mean from where his thoughts are getting transferred in our mind. Okay, so can it be seen in the context of not the rebirth, but there could be proper word for this transformation of his knowledge through book, and for that matter, you also you are transferring something as a mediator, and then it is coming in our mind. How this process can be seen as?
No, I think that's a wonderful question. You see, the word for the Buddha comes from the word buddhi. So one who is endowed with buddhi, isn't it? So and also the word has a connotation of knowing. Yo buddhati so buddho. Okay, so buddhati, buddhi, and buddha. Okay, that we have to understand. And when we talk about the Buddha has a deep compassion for the human beings. And what the Buddha did is try to communicate his Dhamma to the other human beings so that, they can, like him, get enlightened. Okay, we have to bear this thing in our minds that the Buddha's greatest compassion was to transfer his understanding. But of course, he cannot transfer his experiences. So what the Buddha does is transfer his path, his system, his his teachings to the other people so that we can use them and we can similarly likewise walk on that path and we can also become the Buddha. Now, when it comes to the people like Baba Sahib Ambedkar, we know that we human beings are endowed with what is called the language and thoughts. And the language and thoughts are interrelated, isn't it? A lot of our problems comes because we get attached to the language and the words. For example, the caste system is all about labels, isn't it? And the different labels have different connotations. And they change the complete psychological sort of a makeup of a person, you know. So what is important here is to, is to think through. The Buddha will never ask us to not think. The Buddha will be the first person to ask us to think more deeply, but he will ask us to be guarded against speculative thinking. He will ask us to not enter into the domain of futile thinking, which is not beneficial to me and others. So the person like Baba Sahib Ambedkar or the Buddha, they create this raft. Like we have seen the sutta that has been talked here, the sutta of raft. This is a very beautiful sutta where the Buddha says that my Dhamma, whatever I taught, is just like a raft. And if we don't use the raft, what happens is that, it is useless, isn't it? So the Buddha and Baba Sahib Ambedkar has constructed what is called a raft by using the language, by using the concepts. And the purpose of that raft is to take us from this shore to that shore, from the shore of suffering to the shore of nirvana, from the ignorance to the enlightenment, from the darkness to light. And that is what the Buddha and Baba Sahib Ambedkar has done. And that is what we have to do. That is what we do when we try to explain to each other what is the importance of studying together, understanding the different concepts. So the key is communication. The key is communication. And we have seen that the Buddha was the master communicator. He could communicate impermanence, he could communicate anatta, he could communicate metta, he could communicate karuna, he could communicate upekha, because he himself embodied those qualities. So, that is why we see that, there are many mudras of the Buddha, but the most famous and the prominent mudra that we see everywhere is the mudra of Dhamma Chakrapavatna. An enlightened being cannot just sit idle. He has to communicate. She has to communicate. Why they have to communicate? Because an enlightened being has a naturally awakened compassion. They cannot see people living foolishly. They cannot see people living in the dark. So they communicate, isn't it? So likewise, we have to use the 5 skandhas are not problem. The 5 skandhas, Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, they are not problematic. Only when we hold on to them, then the problem begins. Then the suffering begins. The Buddha never said that the khanda is suffering. Buddha said upadana khanda, pancha upadana khanda is suffering. Very, very beautifully Buddha says that when we cling to the 5 skandhas, we suffer. When we cling to 5 skandhas, we suffer. That doesn't mean that we cannot use them to transform our own lives and the lives of others. Isn't it? So thinking is a very important part. And the Buddha, as we see, was a very deep thinker. And his thinking is reflected in his language. And it is said that he developed this Pali language just to communicate his Dhamma. So there were sometimes no words, so you have to bring in new words. Paticca Samutpada, for example, I don't think that word existed before the Buddha. So Buddha has to explain what is Paticca Samutpada, what happened to him under the Bodhi tree. Then there were some old words like, karma may be the word. And the Buddha, no, this is the wrong understanding of the karma. So Buddha used the same word, but it has a different connotation altogether. Do you see what I'm trying to get it at? Likewise,
wonderful, yeah.
Yeah, likewise, Baba Sahib Ambedkar, after 2,500 years, after the Buddha, Baba Sahib Ambedkar tried to understand the Dhamma very deeply. And, he studied very deeply, he understood very deeply, and then he tried to communicate his understanding of the Buddha Dhamma to us through this great book, the Buddha and his Dhamma, isn't it? So likewise, when we study, we engage with the study of the Buddha and his Dhamma. It's our duty to communicate to others.
Yes, yes.
Isn't it? Whatever is our understanding, I have my style of, presenting. You might develop your style of presenting. Alkatai might develop her style of presenting, isn't it? But this thing has to happen.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So we have to
Yes.
think deeply. We have to find various ways to communicate, because without communication, suffering cannot be annihilated. If the Buddha had not communicated, where we would be? If Baba Ambedkar had not communicated, where we would be? Isn't it? So we had to find a way to communicate, intelligent way, using, now the word has changed a lot. We have to find is politically different world, is scientifically different word. So in this context, how we can teach the Buddha's teaching? That's a question for us, all of us.
Yes,
Okay.
Mangesh bhai, well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Mangesh bhai. Subhash bhai.
Can you listen? Hello?
Your
Can you
hand
hear
is
me?
up.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for explaining beautifully about these two sections, rebirth of what and rebirth of who. So, what I could understand, rebirth of what means that disintegration of the body part and mixing again into their respective bigger portion of the materials. So, and second one is the rebirth of whom. So there is a least chance or least probability that same person is going to take rebirth. This is what I could get.
Yes.
Now further, I would like to invite your comments or attention on that. Again, it is based on my theory, Sutta, kind of. So it's like that. If a seed of any plant, seed has a probability of germinating again if you put into soil, give water, and getting heat, all things. So there is a probability, high probability of germinate and then grow. On the other hand, if seed is roasted and then you plant it, then whatever you will give, water, oxygen, heat, etc., whatever it is required for germination, it will never grow. So this is what I think Buddha also suggested, that if we are able to control our desires, lust, etc., whatever method he has suggested, so there will be no least chances to rebirth again. Means control on our all desire. So it is a roasting of, similar to roasting the seed. And if there is a desire or other probability, means seed has probability of germination, then it will take. I do not know how far it is appropriate in this context, but your expert advice is.
No, it's a perfect example. It's a good example. If we do not water our desires, they are not going to come, again. But if we are keeping on watering our desires, they are going to come up again and again. So if I'm angrier person, and if I don't cultivate loving kindness, then I will be angrier and angrier and angrier. Okay. Isn't it? So whatever you said is right. We have to cut the roots of what our habit patterns, because there is a habit energy in us. Habit is also a pattern. So the Buddha is not saying that there are not patterns in the world. There is not patterns of mind. There are, but they are not. They cannot be identified with the self. So because there is no Atma, we are going to look into it when we are going to study karma, and we are going to study transmigration. Okay, well, we will be going more deeper into it, so that we will have more clarity. All right, then I think.
So one thing.
Yeah.
So there is a rebirth, that means regeneration of matter, and there is no rebirth of consciousness. Right?
Because the consciousness is not, Atma, that transferring from one body to another body.
Yeah, it appears only when there is combination of these four elements, cause and condition.
Some people
And-
say, yeah,
Huh.
some people say that it can help to kickstart a new birth, but that is not our consciousness. Whatever we are calling it my consciousness, it's not my consciousness. It's just a consciousness. It's just a solid. It's just a liquid. It's not mine, isn't it? So this like what Pankaj was saying, that the Baba Sahib Ambedkar could transfer his consciousness to us. He could transfer his understanding to us. The Buddha similarly could transfer his understanding to us, right?
Mm. Yes.
Even Buddha has gone physically, Baba Sahib Ambedkar has gone physically, but what their experience was, the experience of awakening, can be experienced by us.
Mm-hmm.
They have transferred the path to us, right?
Yes.
Isn't it? So we can say that it's a rebirth or recurrence of the same path.
Mm.
So for example, we behave in a casteist way, that means the recurrence or the rebirth of the caste mind.
Yes.
Because it's happening again and again, Pono Bhavika. Okay, we will look into that. Not a problem, more and more deeply. And meanwhile, you will keep on your studies also. So let's keep it open and keep on talking and discussing all these things. Okay.
Maybe.
Thank you, Mangesh bhai.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Jai Bhim, Namo Buddha.
Namo Buddhaya.